Rain pounded against the cracked windshield as a sealed mahogany box sat on the passenger seat, carrying an unspoken threat. Delivering it meant a quick payday. Handing it directly into the cold, calculating eyes of Chicago's most untouchable syndicate leader meant she was already a dead woman walking. Nadia Reyes lived by 3 strict rules. Never look inside the package, never ask the sender's motives, and never, under any circumstances, make a delivery past midnight. For 3 years, operating as a high-end off-the-books career in Chicago, these rules had kept her breathing. They kept her hidden from the ghosts of a past she had spent a decade trying to bury. But tonight, the rules were shattered by a desperate phone call from Marcus Doyle, her dispatcher. Doyle was a grizzled man who didn't scare easily, yet his voice had trembled over the encrypted line. The job was simple on paper: deliver a locked mahogany box to Penthouse 4B at the prestigious Ambrose Tower. The recipient was listed as Edmund Whitlock, an aging corporate magnate known for his reclusive habits. The payout was $10,000 in untraceable cash, 5 times her usual rate. Nadia knew the money was a red flag, a flashing neon sign warning her to walk away, but her forged passport was expiring, and she needed the funds to disappear again. The storm outside was violent, a classic Midwestern gale that whipped freezing rain against the concrete canyons of the city. Nadia pulled her trench coat tighter around her slight frame, adjusting the brim of her fedora to shield her face from the lobby security cameras. The Ambrose was a fortress of marble and glass, a playground for billionaires and criminals who wore expensive suits. She bypassed the main concierge using the service elevator code Doyle had provided. The elevator ascended with a nauseating speed, depositing her on the top floor. The corridor was unnervingly silent, the thick Persian carpets absorbing the sound of her footsteps. She reached the heavy oak door of Penthouse 4B. The brass plaque confirmed the number. She raised a gloved hand and knocked twice. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. The door yielded slightly, unlatched. A chill crawled up Nadia's spine. A cardinal rule of the underground courier service was to never enter a client's premises, but the $10,000 hinged on a physical handover and a signature. Pushing the door open, Nadia stepped into a sprawling, dimly lit living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the storm ravaging Lake Michigan. The air smelled of expensive whiskey, rain, and something metallic. Gun oil. "Mr. Whitlock," Nadia called out, her voice steady despite the hammer pounding in her chest. "Edmund isn't here tonight," a voice replied from the shadows. It was a deep, resonant baritone, smooth as aged bourbon, but carrying a jagged edge of authority. A man stepped out from the darkness of the adjacent study. He wasn't the septuagenarian corporate magnate she'd been briefed to expect. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit without a tie. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but it was his eyes that made Nadia freeze, striking, predatory amber, analyzing her with terrifying precision. A faint, jagged scar ran along his jawline, a brutal imperfection on an otherwise aristocratic face. Nadia instantly recognized the aura of power. This wasn't a businessman. This was a predator. "I have a secure delivery for Edmund Whitlock," Nadia said, maintaining her professional composure, gripping the mahogany box tightly. "If he isn't here, I'll have to return the package to the sender." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the man said, stepping closer into the ambient light of the city skyline. "The men who sent that box aren't the type to accept a return to sender. Hand it over." "I'll sign for Edmund. My instructions are strictly for Mr. Whitlock." Nadia took a calculated step back toward the door. "Your instructions," he murmured, closing the distance between them with a terrifying silent grace, "were compromised the moment Doyle picked up the phone. Edmund Whitlock is currently bleeding out in the trunk of a Lincoln Town car somewhere near the docks. I'm taking his deliveries tonight." Nadia's breath hitched. She had walked directly into a syndicate takeover. The man standing before her wasn't just a hitman. The effortless command in his posture suggested he was the one pulling the strings. "Who are you?" she demanded, her survival instincts screaming at her to drop the box and run. "My name is Dante Salvatore," he said smoothly. The name hit Nadia like a physical blow. The Salvatore crime family controlled the entire eastern seaboard's narcotics and weapons trade, and clearly they were now staking their claim in Chicago. Dante was the ruthless heir. A man whispered about in the darkest corners of the underworld, as a phantom who left no loose ends. "Take it," Nadia said, shoving the heavy box toward his chest. "I don't need a signature. I don't need the money. Just let me walk out of here." Dante took the box, his fingers brushing against hers. His skin was warm, a sharp contrast to his cold demeanor. He didn't move out of her way. Instead, he stared down at the polished wood, a dark amusement dancing in his amber eyes. "You aren't curious about what Edmund was hiding?" "I don't care," Nadia snapped, sidestepping him. "My job is done." "Wait." The sheer force in his voice stopped her dead in her tracks. He walked over to the marble kitchen island, setting the box down. From his pocket, he produced a slim steel lockpick. Within 3 seconds, the brass lock on the mahogany box clicked open. Nadia shouldn't have looked. She should have run out the door. But the hypnotic pull of the moment kept her rooted to the spot. Dante flipped the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of crimson velvet, was not a weapon, nor a drive of blackmailed secrets. It was a silver locket, heavily tarnished, bearing the crest of a roaring lion. Dante stared at the object, the amused smirk vanishing from his face, replaced by a sudden, dangerous intensity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nadia felt the blood drain from her face. She recognized that crest. It was the exact same crest tattooed on the back of her left shoulder. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain against the penthouse glass. Dante reached into the box, his large fingers delicately tracing the engraved lion on the silver locket. "Edmund Whitlock," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, "was a highly cautious man. He was laundering 50 million a month for the Russian mob. I came here to intercept his ledger. But he didn't send a ledger away tonight, did he?" He turned to look at Nadia. His amber eyes were no longer just analytical. They blazed with a volatile mix of shock, rage, and profound, terrifying recognition. "He sent this," Dante continued, holding up the locket by its silver chain. It swayed like a pendulum between them, a piece of a past that was supposed to have been reduced to ash 10 years ago in Brooklyn. Nadia forced her face into a mask of total indifference. "I don't know what that is. I just deliver the packages, Mr. Salvatore. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned toward the door, her hand reaching for the brass handle. "Stop running, Isabel." The name dropped into the quiet room like a live grenade. Nadia froze, her hand hovering inches from the doorknob. Her heart stopped, then restarted with a violent, erratic rhythm. No one had called her Isabel in a decade. Nadia Reyes did not exist before 2016. Nadia Reyes liked indie music, drank oat milk lattes, and kept her head down. Isabel Marchetti was the only daughter of the Marchetti syndicate, a girl who had watched her entire family burn to the ground in a brutal turf war. She slowly turned around, dropping the innocent courier facade. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and the terrified girl vanished, replaced by the hardened survivor who had outlived a massacre. "How do you know that name?" she asked, her voice lethal and calm. Dante took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The harsh overhead lighting caught the scar on his jaw, illuminating the years of violence he had endured. "You dye your hair blonde, you change your posture. You bury your accent," he said, his gaze sweeping over her. "But you can't change your eyes, Izzy. You have your father's cold, calculating stare. I would know it anywhere." "My father is dead," Isabel spat, the venom in her voice surprising even herself. "And so is the girl you think you recognize. I am Nadia Reyes." "Nadia Reyes is a ghost," Dante countered, stopping just 3 feet away. "But Isabel Marchetti is a very real, very dangerous liability. The Marchetti heir. The girl who supposedly died in the fire that claimed the rest of her family." He held up the locket. "Edmund Whitlock was your father's consigliere before he changed his name and fled to Chicago. He had this locket. Inside it is the master key to the offshore accounts your father hid before the Salvatore family wiped him out." Isabel's mind raced. Edmund Whitlock was actually Edmund Langley, the man who had bounced her on his knee when she was a child. "If the Salvatores wiped my family out," Isabel said, slipping a hand into the deep pocket of her trench coat, wrapping her fingers around the grip of her concealed tactical knife, "then why are you standing here talking to me? Finish the job, Dante. Or are you too soft to kill a woman?" Dante didn't flinch. Instead, a muscle feathered in his jaw. "If I wanted you dead, Izzy, you wouldn't have made it off the elevator. My father ordered the hit on your family. I was the one who left the back door of your estate unlocked so you could escape into the woods." The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Isabel stumbled back, shaking her head. You're lying. You were a foot soldier for your father. You hated us. I hated the war, Dante corrected softly. And I wasn't about to let an 18-year-old girl burn alive for the sins of her father. I let you go. I spent 10 years making sure my family thought you were dead. And now you walk directly into my hands, carrying the very key that could fund a massive retaliation against my own blood. Before Isabel could process the weight of his words, a sharp electronic beep echoed through the penthouse. Dante's head snapped toward the digital security panel on the wall. The screen was flashing red. Breach. Lobby. Breach. Elevator 1. Dante swore violently in Italian. He dropped the locket into his pocket and drew a suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster in one fluid motion. Who is that? Isabel demanded, drawing her knife, her career persona entirely discarded. I took this building an hour ago. My men were in the lobby, Dante said, moving rapidly to the heavy oak door and sliding 3 deadbolts into place. If that alarm is going off, it means my men are dead. Which means the people coming up that elevator aren't mine. Then whose are they? Dante turned to look at her, the gravity of the situation darkening his amber eyes. Whitlock was a rat, Isabel. He didn't just call a courier tonight. He called the Russian Bratva to extract him. They're coming for the locket. And they're coming for the money. Heavy. Synchronized footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. And if they find you here, Dante said, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the back of the penthouse, they won't just kill you. They'll parade the resurrected Marchetti princess through the streets before they cut you to pieces. I don't need your protection, Isabel hissed, trying to wrench her arm away. Good, Dante replied grimly, tossing her a spare magazine from his belt. Because we have about 30 seconds before they blow that door off its hinges, and I only have 14 bullets. The heavy oak door of penthouse 4B didn't just open. It splintered into 1,000 jagged projectiles as a breaching charge detonated in the corridor. The concussive shockwave threw Isabel against the marble kitchen island. The air instantly filled with the acrid stench of C4 and pulverized drywall, before the dust could even begin to settle. 3 figures clad in black tactical gear poured through the ruined doorway, their suppressed rifles sweeping the room with lethal precision. Dante didn't hesitate. He was a phantom in the smoke. He fired twice. The lead Russian dropped heavily onto the Persian rug, clutching a shattered Kevlar visor. Move! Dante roared over the deafening blare of the building's emergency sirens. He laid down covering fire, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows to create a chaotic distraction of howling wind and torrential rain. The storm immediately invaded the penthouse, sending expensive lamps and paperwork flying. Isabel didn't freeze. The decades she had spent hiding had not softened the survival instincts bred into her by the Marchetti bloodline. She dove behind a heavy suede sofa, her fingers gripping the spare magazine Dante had tossed her. A second assailant flanked the living room, zeroing in on her position. As the mercenary rounded the sofa, Isabel lunged from the shadows, driving her tactical knife upward, bypassing the heavy body armor and striking the vulnerable gap beneath his armpit. The man choked, his rifle clattering to the floor. Isabel ruthlessly yanked the weapon free, scooped up his fallen pistol, and rolled back into cover just as a hail of bullets shredded the upholstery where she'd been a second prior. You know how to use that, Dante yelled over the chaos, crouching behind a shattered mahogany bookshelf. Blood trickled from a shallow graze on his temple, a stark crimson line against his pale skin. I grew up in a syndicate, Salvatore? Isabel fired 3 rapid shots, forcing the remaining gunmen in the hallway to duck for cover. I wasn't taking ballet classes. Down the hall, the master suite, Dante commanded, tossing a stun grenade toward the corridor. The blinding flash bought them exactly 4 seconds. They sprinted down the hallway, the hardwood floors slick with rain blowing in from the ruined living room. Dante kicked open the double doors of the master bedroom and immediately slammed them shut, engaging the heavy steel deadbolt. There's no way out of here, Isabel panted, her chest heaving as she checked the ammunition in the pistol. We're on the 50th floor. Unless you can fly. This is a dead end. The Ambrose was built by a paranoid billionaire, Dante said, his amber eyes scanning the opulent room. He moved toward a massive walk-in closet lined with custom Italian suits and racks of expensive leather footwear, pushing aside a row of heavy winter coats to reveal a seamless wood-paneled wall. Whitlock was paranoid enough to insist on a private service chute. It goes straight down to the sub-basement laundry. He pressed a sequence of numbers into a hidden keypad. The wall hissed, sliding back to reveal a cramped industrial lift meant for laundry carts and discreet exits. Gunfire erupted against the bedroom doors behind them. The wood began to splinter. Get in, Dante ordered, shoving her into the metallic box. He climbed in after her, hitting the descent button just as the bedroom doors gave way. The lift dropped with a stomach-churning lurch, plunging them into absolute darkness. The tight confines of the shaft forced them together. Isabel was pressed against Dante's chest, the metallic scent of his gun oil mingling with the copper tang of his blood and the expensive bergamot of his cologne. In the pitch black, surrounded by the deafening hum of the elevator cables, the reality of the situation crashed over her. She was locked in a dark box with the head of the Salvatore family. "You're bleeding," Isabel noted, her voice barely a whisper in the dark, betraying none of the panic swirling in her chest. "It's a graze," Dante replied, his chest rising and falling heavily against hers. Even in the dark, she could feel the intense heat of his gaze. "You handle yourself well under fire, Izzy. Nadia Reyes is full of surprises." "Stop calling me Izzy," she snapped, though there was no real venom left in her voice, only a profound exhaustion. "And I handled myself because I had to learn how to survive after your family burned my world to the ground." The lift hit the sub-basement with a heavy jolt, throwing her off balance. Dante caught her waist, his large hands firm and grounding. He didn't let go immediately. "I told you," he said softly, his tone vibrating with a dark sincerity. "I let you go that night because I knew the truth, and tonight you're going to learn it too." He pushed the grated door open, leading her out into the cavernous, damp concrete of the Ambrose sub-basement. Above them, the sirens continued to wail, a distant symphony of the chaos they'd just escaped. They stole a charcoal gray Dodge Charger from the VIP parking section, Dante hot-wiring the vehicle with the effortless skill of a man who had spent his youth on the gritty streets before ascending to the throne. They drove in silence through the torrential rain, tearing down Lower Wacker Drive, avoiding the main arteries of Chicago where the police response would be swarming. Dante navigated the labyrinth of underground streets until they reached a nondescript warehouse in the West Loop, an industrial district transitioning into high-end lofts. He pulled the Charger into a secure loading bay, the heavy metal doors rolling shut behind them, sealing them away from the storm and the prying eyes of the city. The safe house inside was Spartan, but heavily fortified. Concrete walls, a few leather chairs, a medical kit on a steel table, and a bank of encrypted servers humming in the corner. "Sit," Dante instructed, pointing to a chair as he tossed his suit jacket onto the table. He moved to a small sink, washing the blood from his face. Isabel didn't sit. She paced the length of the room, still gripping the pistol. "I want answers, Dante. You dragged me into this. You said Edmund Whitlock was my father's consigliere. You said the locket is the key. Tell me what's going on before I put a bullet in your knee and walk out of here." Dante dried his face with a towel and turned to look at her. The harsh, fluorescent lighting cast deep shadows across his aristocratic face, emphasizing the jagged scar on his jaw. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished silver locket. "My father ordered the hit on the Marchetti family," Dante stated, walking over to the bank of servers. "But he didn't orchestrate it. He was hired." Isabel stopped pacing. The air in the room grew thin. "Hired?" The Salvatore's answered to no one. "Everyone answers to $50 million, Isabel," Dante said grimly. He used his tactical knife to pry the back panel of the silver locket open. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. Concealed within the silver casing was a micro SD card. He extracted it delicately and inserted it into a secure card reader on his terminal. Lines of code and encrypted banking data began to flood the dual monitors. 10 years ago, your father was preparing to legitimize the Marchetti Empire, Dante explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard to bypass the encryption. He moved the family's entire liquid fortune, over $500 million, into a ghost account in Zurich. He wanted to wash his hands of the blood and buy a legitimate future for you. Isabel felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "My father wanted out." "Yes, but not everyone in your family shared his vision for a peaceful civilian life." Dante hit the enter key. The screen flashed green, decrypting the final firewall. Edmund Whitlock wasn't just hiding the money. He was holding it for the man who paid my father to execute your parents. A face and a name appeared on the screen alongside a series of wire transfers dated back to the night of the Brooklyn massacre. Isabel stared at the monitor, all the blood draining from her face. Her hands began to tremble, the pistol slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the concrete floor. Dominic Marchetti, her uncle. The man who had wept at her parents' empty caskets. The man who had sworn blood vengeance against the Salvatore family, rallying the remnants of their syndicate to war. "Dominic," Isabel whispered, a suffocating betrayal wrapping around her throat. "He paid my father to kill his own brother," Dante said, his voice unusually gentle. "He wanted the throne, and he wanted the 500 million. But Edmund Whitlock took the account keys and vanished. Dominic has spent 10 years searching for Edmund, and he finally found him tonight." The Russians, Isabel realized, her eyes wide as she looked at Dante. They weren't working for Edmund. They were working for Dominic. Dominic sent them to retrieve the locket. "Exactly," Dante confirmed. "And instead of Edmund, they found you, the true heir, the only person legally capable of walking into that Zurich bank and claiming the money. The moment Dominic realizes you're alive, he won't stop until you're dead. You're the only loose end standing between him and a $500 million empire." Isabel backed away from the screen, her back hitting the cold concrete wall. 10 years of running, 10 years of hiding under the guise of Nadia Reyes, a meaningless courier delivering secrets in the dead of night. She had spent a decade hating the Salvatore family, only to find out the architect of her destruction shared her own last name. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage pricked her eyes. She fiercely wiped them away. Dante closed the distance between them. He didn't crowd her, but his presence was a heavy, comforting anchor in the spiraling chaos of her mind. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing against her cheekbone. "I spent 10 years keeping you off the radar, Isabel," Dante said, his amber eyes burning with a fierce, possessive intensity. "I killed my own father to take control of this syndicate, just to ensure the hunt for the Marchetti girl was permanently called off." Isabel looked up at him, the jagged edges of his past mirroring her own. The Mafia Boss of Chicago, the ruthless phantom of the underworld, had torn apart his own empire to protect the girl he was supposed to kill. The tension between them, simmering since the moment she walked into the penthouse, suddenly shifted from adversarial to an electric, overwhelming gravity. "Why?" she breathed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Because in a world built on lies and blood," Dante whispered, lowering his face until his lips were inches from hers, "you were the only innocent thing I ever encountered. And I'll be damned if I let Dominic Marchetti finish what he started." Isabel didn't pull away. The terrified courier, Nadia Reyes, officially died in that warehouse. In her place stood Isabel Marchetti, reborn in the ashes of betrayal, fueled by a vengeance that matched the dark fire in Dante's eyes. "Dominic wants the throne," Isabel said, her voice dropping to a lethal velvet whisper. She reached up, gripping the lapels of Dante's bloodstained shirt, pulling him just a fraction closer. "Then we're going to burn it to the ground with him on it." Dante's mouth curved into a dangerous, predatory smile. "I thought you'd never ask, Mia Regina." The storm raged on outside, but inside the concrete walls of the warehouse, a new syndicate was born. A deadly alliance forged in silver, sealed in blood, and bound by a vengeance that Chicago would never forget. If Isabel and Dante's explosive alliance left you breathless, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this story with your fellow romance addicts, and subscribe for more thrilling, pulse-pounding tales. Drop a comment below telling us what you think Isabel and Dante will do to Uncle Dominic. Stay tuned for what happens next.